The Redmond Estate had always been a place of whispered rumors and hushed conversations in the nearby town. Children dared each other to run up to its rusted gates, only to retreat screaming when the wind made the broken shutters rattle like fingernails on wood. The locals spoke of it in fragmented sentences, their voices dipping low as though the house itself might overhear and punish them for speaking too freely. No one had lived there for decades, not since the disappearance of the last Redmond heir, and yet the mansion's walls seemed alive, holding every secret, every memory, every tragedy that had ever taken place within. I had always been drawn to places with histories so dark they seemed to cast a shadow across reality itself. When I first heard of the Redmond Estate, I knew I had to see it for myself. Arriving at the property, the gates towered above me, twisted iron adorned with symbols that I could not identify, almost ritualistic in their design. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, and the wind carried with it a strange hum, like a warning resonating just beyond comprehension. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, yet there was something compelling, magnetic even, that drew me forward. The path to the main entrance was overgrown, grass and weeds clawing at the cracked stones. The closer I got, the more I felt the weight of the estate pressing down, a combination of history and hidden menace that made my chest tighten. The front door was massive, its wood warped with age, the iron studs rusted and pockmarked. I paused before touching it, hand hovering over the handle, and imagined the stories it could tell. The laughter of children long gone, the arguments of adults consumed by their own secrets, the silences so thick they were almost tangible. Finally, with a steadying breath, I pushed the door open. The groan of the hinges echoed through the grand foyer, a sound so loud and accusatory that it made me flinch. Dust hung in the air like fog, and every surface was layered with the residue of years left untouched. The chandelier above swayed gently, as if moved by an unseen hand, casting fractured shadows across the walls. My footsteps on the floorboards were swallowed by the vastness of the space, making me acutely aware of the emptiness around me. I explored the first floor carefully, noting the remnants of luxury long past. The furniture was covered in white sheets, resembling ghostly forms frozen in time. Ornate paintings lined the walls, their colors dulled by dust but still depicting the proud faces of Redmond ancestors. I studied them closely, sensing the weight of expectation and the unspoken pressure each generation had carried. It was as though the walls themselves remembered the lineage, the legacy, and the tragedies, holding them in a silent, unyielding grip. In the dining room, I found the table set as if for a grand feast, silverware tarnished, crystal glasses clouded, yet arranged with perfect precision. It was a frozen moment, a snapshot of a life abruptly halted. There was an oppressive quiet, but it was more than mere silence. It was the anticipation of something that had been waiting, always waiting, for someone to discover it. I couldn't help but feel the estate watching me, gauging my intentions, measuring my curiosity against the lessons it had stored within its walls. As I moved further into the house, the corridors grew narrower, the ceilings lower, and the air heavier. A cold draft slipped through broken windows, making the hair on my arms stand on end. The estate seemed to breathe around me, exhaling stories I could almost hear if I listened closely enough. The bedrooms, once lavish and bright, now stood as relics of despair and abandonment. Broken toys littered the floors, diaries torn and scattered, clothing yellowed and moth-eaten. Every room told a story, but one central question haunted me. What was the secret that had forced this family into silence, into disappearance, into history itself? Then I reached the library, a room that seemed to pulse with knowledge and darkness alike. The shelves were vast, stretching from floor to ceiling, filled with books that smelled of mold and time. Some volumes appeared ordinary, while others were bound in leather etched with symbols, I could not recognize. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the ridges of centuries-old craftsmanship, and wondered how many hands had held these books, how many minds had pored over their contents, and how many had been consumed by the weight of the estate's hidden truth. At the center of the library, a large desk stood under a shattered window. Papers were scattered across its surface, as though someone had left in a hurry. Among them, I noticed a small locked box, its metal glinting faintly in the dim light. It seemed ordinary, yet in the silence of the estate, it radiated significance. I knew instinctively that whatever it contained would explain much, perhaps everything about the Redmond family's The box was a final promise, a warning, and a revelation, all in one, and I felt a shiver of anticipation and dread at the thought of opening it. Hours passed, as I explored the ground floor, each room revealing fragments of lives entwined with secrets, mistakes, and tragedy. The estate was alive with memory, yet it remained impenetrable, offering only hints, shadows, and whispers. Every discovery made me more certain of the truth I was chasing. The Redmond Estate had been a keeper of secrets too terrible to face, yet too compelling to ignore. Its legacy was one of control, fear, and the quiet shaping of destiny. Across generations, as twilight began to settle outside, casting long shadows across the estate's facade, I finally ascended the main staircase. Each step groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion yet acknowledging my presence. At the top, the hall stretched endlessly, doors lining each side, each hiding stories of triumph, tragedy, and terror. The upper floor, I knew, would hold the most intimate secrets, the private horrors, the family disputes, the moments of desperation that had driven the Redmonds into obscurity. Before entering the first bedroom, I paused to reflect on what I had uncovered. The Redmond Estate was more than a house. It was a living archive of human nature at its most intense, at its most vulnerable, at its most frightening. It had watched generations grow, suffer, and vanish, and it continued to wait for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover the truth. With a steadying breath, I reached for the door handle, feeling the final layer of fear and curiosity intertwine. I was about to step into the heart of the estate, into the room that would begin to reveal the horrifying secret it had hidden for centuries. And as I crossed the threshold, I knew there was no turning back. The moment I stepped onto the upper floor, the air shifted. It was heavier here, almost suffocating, carrying with it the residue of years of fear, sorrow, and the kind of secrets that fester when no one dares speak them aloud. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors, each promising a different story, a different revelation. Shadows clung to the walls like living things, flickering in the dim light that filtered through broken shutters. Every step I took echoed through the corridor, a reminder that I was intruding into a place that had long been sealed from human curiosity. The first room I approached was once a child's bedroom, now frozen in time. The wallpaper had peeled in long strips, revealing the dark wood beneath, and a small bed sat crookedly in the corner, its mattress yellowed and sagging. On the floor, toys were scattered as if someone had left in haste. A porcelain doll lay face down, its cracked features staring blankly at the ceiling, and I couldn't help but shiver as I picked it up. It was in these personal spaces that the weight of the Redmond family's tragedy hit hard. I could feel the echoes of laughter and tears, mingled together and preserved by the house itself. A journal lay open on a desk, its pages brittle with age. I ran my fingers carefully over the writing. The ink faded but still legible. It was a child's voice, innocent yet burdened by fear, recounting moments of secrecy, punishment, and whispers that haunted every corner of the house. The child wrote of shadows moving when no one was around, of doors that seemed to close by themselves, of the suffocating presence of something unseen. I realized then that the horrors of the Redmond Estate were not just legend. They were meticulously documented by those who lived through them, even if they were too young to fully comprehend their meaning. I moved on to the next door, slightly ajar, revealing a master bedroom. The furniture was grand, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, now decayed and lifeless. A large four-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains moth-eaten and hanging in tatters. On a vanity, a cracked mirror reflected my own face, but I felt as though it also reflected the anguish that had consumed the family that had lived here. There were letters strewn across the floor, yellowed with age, and as I picked one up, I realized it contained correspondence between the last Redmond patriarch and an unknown confidant. The words spoke of fear, of debts owed to powerful people, and of knowledge too dangerous to reveal. It became evident that the family had been trapped, not just by the estate itself, but by external forces, human and otherwise, that had orchestrated their downfall. Each room I entered revealed more layers of the family's life, and the burdens they carried. A small study contained ledgers filled with names, dates, and transactions that hinted at clandestine dealings, some legal, some disturbingly illicit. A guest room displayed the belongings of visitors who had come and gone, leaving traces of stories that the house had absorbed and kept. Even the attic floor above me, though I hadn't yet ventured there, seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the very building was trying to protect its deepest secret from discovery. I noticed a faint draft coming from a door at the far end of the hallway. It was slightly different from the others, almost imperceptibly colder, and a thin layer of dust had settled in a pattern that suggested frequent disturbance. My heart raced as I approached. Something about this room felt alive, as though it were aware of my presence, and prepared to test my resolve. I hesitated, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me, before finally turning the handle and pushing it open. Inside, I found a hidden study, smaller than the others, but filled with items that suggested both secrecy and obsession. Books with locked bindings lined the shelves, manuscripts with cryptic symbols filled the desk, and a single chair faced a wall with what appeared to be an intricate pattern etched into the wood. I realized quickly that this was the room where the family's true knowledge and darkest secrets had been kept, a place meant to isolate and protect information too dangerous for casual eyes. The room exuded an energy that was almost tangible, a mixture of intellect, fear, and suppressed power. On the desk, a large ledger lay open. It detailed events that no outsider had ever been meant to see, chronicling generations of manipulation, betrayal, and the methods by which the Redmond family had kept themselves above scrutiny, while simultaneously being destroyed by their own secret. Each page told of strategies, alliances, and missteps, the culmination of centuries of careful, ruthless planning that had ultimately failed. The more I read, the more I understood that this was not simply a family haunted by misfortune. It was a family consumed by the weight of its own ambitions, and the sins passed down like a curse. As I delved deeper, I discovered a series of photographs tucked between the pages. They depicted family members across generations, their faces stern, proud, and often anxious. One image showed a gathering of the family in the very room I now occupied, a scene frozen in time that suggested they had been aware of the room's significance. Another photo revealed a figure at the window, obscured by shadows, hinting at surveillance, secrecy, or possibly a supernatural presence that had been intertwined with the Redmond lineage. Each image added a layer of depth to the estate's dark narrative, confirming that nothing within these walls was accidental. I realized that every detail mattered: the position of the furniture, the books, the journals, the letters, even the personal belongings scattered across the floor. The Redmond Estate was a meticulously preserved archive, curated by its inhabitants over generations, to protect a truth that was too perilous to reveal. And yet, it was all here, waiting for someone who had the courage or the foolishness to uncover it. Time seemed to stretch and distort as I continued my exploration. Hours felt like minutes, and the dim light outside began to fade into evening, casting long shadows across the hallway and rooms. The estate's oppressive atmosphere grew heavier, pressing against my chest, whispering warnings I could not fully interpret. Yet I pressed on, drawn by the irresistible pull of discovery, knowing that I was closer than ever to unveiling the secret that had claimed the Redmond family for centuries. I paused finally at the door leading to the attic, the highest point of the house. Unlike the other rooms, this one was locked, a final barrier between me and the truth. I knew that behind this door lay the culmination,
of the family's legacy, the moment where ambition, fear, and secrecy converged into a revelation that would explain everything I had seen thus far. With a steadying breath, I reached for the lock, feeling the final layer of anticipation, dread, and curiosity intertwine. The Redmond Estate had kept its secret for generations, and now at last, I was on the verge of discovering it. The attic door was heavier than I expected, its wood swollen with age, the metal handle cold and unyielding under my fingers. I had been drawn here, as if the house itself had guided me to this precise moment, leading me to the apex of its secret. With a final push, the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled upward, dust motes floating in the slanting beams of the late afternoon sun that struggled to penetrate the grimy windows. The air was thick with the scent of decay, old paper, and a faint metallic tang that made my stomach twist with anticipation and unease. I ascended slowly, each step groaning under my weight, echoing in the empty shaft, like a warning to turn back. At the top, the attic opened into a low-ceilinged space, filled with trunks, crates, and stacks of forgotten belongings. The dim light revealed a jumble of items that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet carried the unmistakable weight of the past. Each object told a story, whispered a fragment of memory, and suggested that this room had been carefully curated by someone who wanted to preserve the truth, but also protect it from the world. In the center of the attic stood a large chest, ornately carved, its surface etched with symbols I could not immediately recognize. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but there was a sinister air about it, as if the chest itself was alive with intention, guarding its contents with silent ferocity. I approached cautiously, running my hands over the intricate patterns, feeling the grooves and indentations, each telling me that this object was older than the house itself, or at least as old as the Redmond family's obsession with secrecy. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay a collection of journals, bound in leather darkened with age, their pages brittle and yellowed. Each volume seemed to pulse with history, the accumulation of thoughts, confessions, and truths too dangerous for ordinary eye. I picked one up, and the weight of it in my hands felt symbolic, carrying the burden of generations, the confessions of those who had lived, suffered, and died under the oppressive shadow of the Redmond name. As I flipped through the pages, I realized these were not merely diaries. They were meticulous records of the family's actions, their alliances, betrayals, and the precise mechanisms of their rise and fall. There were diagrams, coded messages, and annotations in margins that suggested a constant awareness of being watched, or of needing to watch others. The words painted a picture of calculated ambition, of pride that veered dangerously into obsession, and of a fear that had metastasized across generations. It became painfully clear that the Redmond family had been haunted not just by external forces, but by the legacy of their own choices, a curse born from secrecy and control.
Among the journals, I discovered letters that had never been sent, addressed to unnamed individuals. These letters contained the rawest confessions of the family members, written in moments of desperation, guilt, and revelation. One letter detailed the loss of a child under circumstances that had been obscured from the public record, hinting at neglect, misunderstanding, or possibly something far darker. Another described financial dealings that had led to the family's ruin, carefully orchestrated manipulations meant to preserve wealth that ultimately left them exposed and vulnerable. Each letter carried the voice of a person trapped between public expectation and private torment, their lives unfolding like a cautionary tale in meticulous, heart-wrenching detail. I noticed a peculiar object at the back of the chest, a small ornate key carved from iron, corroded yet still sharp in design. Its presence suggested that there was another layer, another lock to open, another secret withheld even within this forbidden room. My pulse quickened. This key could unlock something monumental, perhaps the culmination of the Redmond family's darkest secrets, hidden away to protect them from discovery, or to ensure that only someone persistent and brave, or foolish enough, would ever know the truth. Beyond the chest, I explored the corners of the attic, There were faded photographs, some depicting family gatherings in opulent settings, smiles frozen in time that now seemed hollow and staged. Other photographs were of unknown locations, maps with routes drawn in red ink, notes scribbled in a hand that was precise, anxious, almost obsessive. These artifacts suggested that the family's reach extended beyond the estate, and that the secret they had tried to protect might involve far more than domestic tragedy. A trunk in the far corner drew my attention. It was smaller than the chest, but equally imposing, its lock rusted, and its surface scarred from age. Inside I found what could only be described as a collection of personal artifacts, trinkets and symbols of both devotion and fear. Some items were religious, others seemed ritualistic, and all were preserved as if by some morbid reverence for the past. It became evident that the Redmonds were not merely victims of circumstance. They had been participants in their own haunting, willingly or not, each action contributing to a cycle of secrecy, obsession and misfortune. Among these objects was a small leather-bound book, much smaller than the journals, yet radiating a sense of profound importance. Its pages were filled with delicate handwriting, the ink still dark despite the passage of decades. The entries were sporadic, jumping across years and generations, and spoke of visions, fears, and premonitions. There were warnings about the family's own practices, notes on ancestral mistakes, and cryptic commentary on the consequences of hidden knowledge. Reading these pages felt like touching the very essence of the family's doom, the curse they had inadvertently created through silence and secrecy. The more I explored, the more I understood that this attic was a repository of not just history, but of consequence. Every object, every page, every photograph contributed to the narrative of a family bound by a curse of their own making. The house itself seemed alive, almost sentient, preserving these items, not as memorabilia, but as instruments of revelation, designed to communicate the weight of the Redmond legacy to anyone willing to seek it. Hours passed unnoticed as I sifted through the treasures and horrors of the attic. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the floor, and the house seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the presence of someone finally bearing witness. I understood then that the Redmond family had left this treasure trove of revelation, intentionally, perhaps as a final act of confession or warning. They had ensured that while their secrets might remain hidden from casual visitors, someone determined could uncover the truth, piece by piece, and comprehend the gravity of generations of choices. Finally, as night fell and darkness enveloped the attic, I set the journals and letters carefully back in their chest. The weight of discovery pressed upon me, the knowledge that what I had uncovered was both invaluable and dangerous. The Redmond Estate was more than a haunted house. It was a living archive of ambition, fear, and the destructive power of secrets. To leave it unexplored would have been cowardice, yet to stay too long was to risk becoming entangled in the same web that had ensnared the family for centuries. With one last glance at the attic, I realized that I had glimpsed a fraction of the truth, enough to understand the magnitude of the Redmond curse, yet still far from the complete story. The secrets meticulously preserved would continue to whisper, waiting for the next intruder bold enough to listen. The house, the attic, the chest, all had been silent witnesses to the consequences of pride, fear, and unspoken truths, a legacy that would endure long after the walls themselves crumbled. As dawn filtered weakly through the grime-coated windows, I returned to the attic, drawn by the magnetism of the journals and letters I had discovered the previous night. The weight of what I had seen lingered heavily in my mind, each memory pressing against my consciousness like a silent accusation. I approached the chest cautiously, half expecting it to resist my touch, as though the house itself understood the danger of what was about to be uncovered. My fingers traced the intricate carvings once more before lifting the lid, revealing the brittle pages and forgotten letters that had already begun to reshape my understanding of the Redmond family. I selected a bundle of letters tied together with a faded ribbon, their edges frayed, and the ink smudged in places where tears or time had left their mark. The handwriting varied from one letter to another, but the tone carried a chilling consistency: desperation, guilt,
and a creeping fear that seemed to seep through the paper itself. These were not casual correspondences. They were confessions, warnings, and detailed accounts of deeds that could never see the light of day. As I unfolded the first page, I felt the gravity of the words immediately. One letter described an event that had occurred decades earlier, the disappearance of a child whose fate had never been explained. The author, a member of the Redmond lineage, wrote with a trembling hand about witnessing something unspeakable, something that had left an indelible scar on their family's conscience. The words were precise, calculated, yet laced with raw emotion: fear of judgment, fear of exposure, and fear of the curse that seemed to plague the family. Every sentence was a reminder that the Redmonds were not just haunted by superstition. They had orchestrated a cycle of secrecy and terror that ensured their own suffering would persist across generations. Another letter revealed financial manipulations, schemes that had torn the family apart while consolidating power in ways that seemed mercilessly strategic. The author chronicled betrayals, hidden debts, and deals made in shadows, each move calculated to maintain the family's influence at any cost. The more I read, the clearer it became that the Redmond legacy was built not only on wealth, but on fear. The fear that one misstep would unravel everything. A fear carefully cultivated to control not just the world outside, but the very hearts and minds of those within the family. Yet the most disturbing letters were the ones that described ritualistic practices, actions that suggested a belief in forces beyond human comprehension. Some pages detailed ceremonies performed in the dead of night, objects and symbols used in ways that seemed almost otherworldly. There were accounts of chants, offerings, and strange behaviors that, when pieced together, indicated a deep-seated conviction in the power of curses and ancestral retribution. It was as though the Redmonds had not merely suffered from a metaphorical curse, they had actively participated in its creation, reinforcing it with every act of secrecy and deception. Among the letters, I discovered a correspondence that had never been sent, addressed to a figure of authority, whose name had been redacted. The writer confessed to knowing about multiple deaths, the exploitation of vulnerable individuals, and acts that skirted the line between malice and madness. The tone was one of quiet panic, the kind that only comes from someone who has witnessed the full scope of horror and understands that silence is complicity. The author pleaded for intervention, for acknowledgement, yet their words were never delivered, leaving the guilt to fester in isolation. As I continued through the letters, a pattern began to emerge. Each generation had inherited not only wealth and property, but a profound awareness of the family's sins and the consequences of exposure. There were references to hidden rooms, secret passages, and objects that had been concealed to protect knowledge too dangerous to share. The Redmonds were custodians of their own history, aware that certain truths could destroy them if revealed. The letters became a map of moral decay, tracing a lineage of fear, secrecy, and calculated survival that was as fascinating as it was horrifying. One particularly chilling letter described an encounter with a stranger, someone who had come seeking the truth about the family. The writer detailed the conversation with meticulous care, noting every word and gesture, and concluded with a warning that anyone who pursued the Redmond secrets would be subject to the same fate as those who had come before. The tone was both protective and ominous, a reminder that the family had mastered the art of self-preservation through psychological intimidation, ensuring that their secrets remained buried for as long as possible. The letters were not merely historical documents, they were a window into a family's collective psyche. Each confession, each recounting of events, was layered with meaning, revealing motivations, fears, and strategies that had been honed over decades. I realized that to understand the Redmond curse fully, one had to engage with these letters, not just as evidence, but as a narrative, a living testimony to the consequences of pride, secrecy, and unbridled ambition. Hours passed. As I read, the room around me darkening. As the day waned, the letters seemed to multiply in significance, each adding depth and context to the previous revelations. I felt the weight of generations pressing down, the stories of lives intertwined with fear and deception shaping a picture more complex and terrifying than I could have imagined. The Redmond Estate was not merely a house haunted by its past. It was a monument to the meticulous construction of dread, a family's legacy etched into paper, wood, and stone, waiting for someone to uncover it and comprehend its full impact. By the time I set the letters down, a quiet understanding had settled over me. The Redmond family's secrets were not just tales of misfortune, they were lessons in power, fear, and the cost of hiding the truth. To engage with them was to participate in their history, to become a witness to the cascade of events that had led to the house's ominous reputation. The letters, in their silent insistence, demanded attention, reflection, and acknowledgement. As I left the attic that evening, the first stars emerging in the night sky, I carried with me not just knowledge, but a sense of responsibility. The letters had revealed truths too potent to ignore, and I knew that understanding them fully would require patience, courage, and perhaps a willingness to confront my own fears. The Redmond curse, as chronicled in these letters, was far from over. Its influence lingered in every shadow, every whispered confession, and every unspoken word, shaping the lives of anyone who dared to delve too deeply into the heart of the house. The house seemed alive, though not in the way of warmth or comfort. Its corridors echoed with the weight of history, each creaking floorboard and groaning beam a testament to the lives that had passed through them. As I descended the narrow staircase from the attic, the letters I had studied clutched in my hands. I realized that the Redmond Estate was more than just a building. It was a repository of memory, a silent observer that had borne witness to decades of despair, fear, and forbidden knowledge. Every door, every shuttered window, seemed to pulse with a quiet awareness, as if the house itself remembered every misstep, every whispered secret, and every act of cruelty or kindness committed within its wall. The rooms I entered were meticulously preserved, yet something about them felt sinister. Dust lay thick over furniture that had long since been abandoned, yet the arrangement suggested human intervention, a deliberate choreography frozen in time. Chairs were placed just so, curtains drawn in a manner that indicated someone had considered both light and privacy, and small personal items, books, trinkets, letters, rested in positions that implied intention, a message left for anyone perceptive enough to notice. It was clear that the Redmonds had lived with an acute awareness that their actions mattered, that every gesture could be recorded by the eyes of the estate itself, and that these rooms would remember long after they had gone. I found myself in what appeared to have been a nursery, its walls painted in faded pastels, though now they were dulled with grime and neglect. A small cradle lay in the corner, and toys were scattered across the floor as if abandoned mid-play. Yet amidst this apparent innocence, the air was heavy with unease. The letters had hinted at the tragedies that befell the family's youngest members, and standing here, surrounded by the remnants of childhood, I felt the weight of those unspoken stories pressing upon me. It was impossible not to imagine the sorrow, the fear, and the whispers of secrets that must have echoed through this space. In the library, rows of books lined the walls, their spines cracked and yellowed with age. The titles ranged from legal texts and financial ledgers to ancient volumes on occult practices and philosophy. It was a collection that spoke to the family's intellect, curiosity, and perhaps their obsession with control and understanding. I carefully opened one of the older volumes, only to find marginalia in an unfamiliar hand, notes that hinted at rituals, coded messages, and references to other family members' misdeeds. Each annotation seemed like a breadcrumb, leading deeper into the web of secrets the Redmonds had cultivated over generations. The house, it seemed, had become both a teacher and a confessor, revealing lessons to those brave enough to seek them. The dining room was perhaps the most unsettling. A long table stretched across the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Dust lay undisturbed on the surface, and yet there were signs of recent use. A half-burned candle, a chair slightly askew, and plates stacked in a manner suggesting someone had been interrupted mid-meal. The letters had mentioned family gatherings that often ended in arguments, betrayals, or whispered warnings. Here in this silent room, one could almost hear the echoes of heated discussions, the shuffling of feet, the clink of silverware against fine china. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable reminder that this house was more than bricks and timber. It was a stage upon which generations had enacted their fears, ambitions, and hidden agendas. Upstairs, the bedrooms revealed intimate details of the Redmonds' personal life. One room, adorned with rich tapestries and ornate furniture, had belonged to a woman whose letters I had read. The bed was meticulously made, yet the corners of the sheets were worn, and a small journal lay on the bedside table. Flipping through its pages, I discovered entries that chronicled her isolation, the pressures of maintaining the family's image, and the creeping realization that she was trapped by forces far beyond her control. The handwriting was delicate yet firm, each sentence revealing a mind at once aware of danger and desperate for agency. These rooms, I realized, were mirrors reflecting the internal struggles of those who had lived within them, and the house had preserved these reflections with unwavering fidelity. As I moved from room to room, I noticed patterns in the placement of objects, the alignment of furniture, and the subtle marks on the walls and floors. These were not accidents, they were deliberate signals, perhaps warnings or guides left by one generation for another. The Redmonds had been meticulous record keepers in both written and environmental forms, embedding secrets into the very structure of their home. The house was not passive, it was a co-conspirator, a vessel of memory and intention, designed to ensure that every lesson, every warning, every curse, remained tangible and unavoidable. I spent hours tracing the intricate web of details, the small clues that linked one room to another, one generation to the next. Each discovery deepened my understanding of the family's tragic patterns, their compulsions, and the relentless grip of their inherited fear. It was clear that the curse was not merely symbolic or superstitious. It was enacted through environment, expectation, and secrecy, reinforced daily by the architecture of the estate itself. To live in the Redmond house was to be constantly reminded of one's place in a lineage of shadows, to inherit the weight of deeds and misdeeds alike.
By late evening, I found myself in the master bedroom, where the last of the letters had indicated the most pivotal events had taken place. Here, the air was thick with history and consequence, the heavy curtains filtering the fading light into a muted glow. Every object, every scratch on the floorboards, seemed to tell a story. I understood then that the Redmonds had designed their lives around the house, and the house had, in turn, shaped the destinies of all who dwelled within it. It was a symbiotic relationship of control, secrecy, and inevitability, one that had bound the family to its fate across decades. As I left the master bedroom and descended the stairs, I felt the cumulative weight of what I had witnessed pressing upon me. The rooms had spoken, in silence and in echoes, of the lives they had housed and the secrets they had kept. The Redmond Estate was not merely a site of tragedy. It was a living testament to the intricate, often horrifying, ways in which a family could be both victim and perpetrator of its own history. The curse, it seemed, was as much about awareness and observation as it was about supernatural forces, and the house had been both accomplice and chronicler throughout. The Redmond Estate had a way of concealing its truths, hiding them behind false walls, beneath floorboards, and in chambers no one ever expected to exist. After exploring the main rooms, I realized that much of the family's history, the most damning and dangerous secrets, were deliberately tucked away in places designed to be forgotten. It was as if the house itself knew that certain stories were too volatile, too shameful, or too horrific to remain in plain sight, and so it had created secret compartments, hidden staircases, and locked doors, whose keys had been scattered across generations, ensuring that only the most determined intruder could uncover them. My first discovery was behind a false panel in the library. The wood felt slightly different under my fingers, colder, smoother, and when I pressed the edge, it gave way with a quiet click. Behind it lay a narrow corridor, just wide enough to squeeze through, lined with shelves that contained journals, ledgers, and small boxes, wrapped in decaying velvet. Each item was meticulously labeled in the careful script of someone who had anticipated future eyes, someone who wanted these secrets preserved for posterity, or perhaps to damn anyone who stumbled upon them. The air in the chamber was heavy with dust and the faint scent of old paper, but there was also something more intangible, a sense of anticipation, as if the house itself was aware that a new witness had entered its most guarded space. Inside one of the small boxes were letters that revealed betrayals so intimate and cruel that it was difficult to believe they had occurred. Affairs, blackmail, coerced confessions, and manipulations stretched across decades, linking one family member's downfall to another's ambitions. The pattern was chilling. The Redmonds were bound together, not only by blood, but by a shared participation in secrecy and deceit, each generation complicit in reinforcing the curse that had become their inheritance. As I read, I felt the house watching me, aware that these revelations were meant to be discovered only by someone persistent enough to follow its hidden pathways. The second chamber I uncovered required more ingenuity. Behind the dining room's massive fireplace, there was a latch, nearly invisible unless one knew precisely where to look. Activating it revealed a spiral staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated at the top, the air growing colder and heavier with each step, the flicker, my lantern barely illuminating the stone walls. Descending further, I found myself in an underground chamber, its walls carved with symbols that mirrored those in the journals I had seen earlier. Candles had long since burned out here, but the wax dripped in patterns that suggested ritualistic observances. The room was suffused with an aura of reverence and fear, a place where the Redmonds had confronted forces, whether spiritual, psychological, or symbolic, that most families never encountered. At the center of this chamber stood a pedestal with a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn, almost pulsing with a quiet insistence that it be opened. The pages contained confessions, observations, and meticulous notes regarding every generation's interactions, mistakes, and transgressions. The handwriting shifted between elegant script and hurried scrawls, reflecting the emotional state of its various authors. There were warnings too, predictions that seemed to foreshadow events long before they occurred, and rituals designed to protect the family, though they often seemed to invite more danger than safety. This was the heart of the Redmond Estate's hidden narrative, a concentrated record of obsession, fear, and the inescapable pull of legacy. I spent hours in the underground chambers, uncovering the ways in which the Redmonds had manipulated their environment to reinforce the family curse. Locks were deliberately complex, walls shifted subtly over time to disorient intruders, and hidden passages connected rooms in ways that were almost labyrinthine. Every element was designed to protect certain knowledge, while controlling access to it. The architecture itself became a character in the story, shaping behavior, fostering paranoia, and ensuring that the house's inhabitants could never fully escape its influence. Yet despite the house's oppressive control, there were glimpses of resistance. Some journals contained cryptic annotations, messages between family members who had attempted to break the cycle, to escape the inherited pattern of secrecy and fear. They spoke of letters hidden under floorboards, symbols painted over in secrecy, and efforts to destroy documents that chronicled the most shameful act. These small rebellions were ultimately unsuccessful, and it was clear that the house had outlasted every attempt at defiance, preserving the family's darkest truths for future discovery. The chambers also revealed an intricate system of cross-generational warning. One generation had documented the missteps and errors of the previous, leaving cryptic notes for the next to interpret. Some of these messages were straightforward, cautioning against greed or cruelty, while others were deliberately obscure, requiring knowledge of specific events or patterns to decode. It was as if the Redmonds had created a complex puzzle, a gauntlet that would ensure only those who were astute, persistent, and fearless could uncover the full story. The house functioned as both archivist and test, preserving its secrets while challenging anyone who sought the truth. By the time I emerged from the hidden chambers, the night had fully fallen, and the estate seemed to have shifted around me. The corridors felt narrower, the shadows longer, and every creak of the floorboards carried new weight. I understood that the Redmonds' hidden spaces were not merely physical constructs. They were extensions of the family's collective psyche, material manifestations of fear, control, and inheritance. Every generation had contributed to this labyrinth, ensuring that the curse, though silent, remained potent and pervasive. The lessons of the hidden chambers were clear. Knowledge could be both a weapon and a burden, and the house would preserve it,
Long after the Redmonds themselves were gone, it was impossible to leave without feeling the weight of those who had come before, and the awareness that the estate was still actively shaping the present, guiding actions, and constraining possibility. The Redmond curse was not a myth. It was an architectural, psychological, and spiritual force, embedded so deeply in the home, that it could not easily be escaped. As I closed the final hidden door, and returned to the main hall, I felt a mixture of awe and dread. The Redmond estate had revealed its deepest secrets to me, and yet I knew this was only a portion of its story. The chambers whispered that more awaited discovery, more evidence of the family's entanglement with their own darkness, and more lessons for anyone bold enough to trace the house's shadowed path. The weight of history pressed upon me, a tangible reminder that some legacies are inescapable, that some curses endure not through superstition, but through design, and that the past, no matter how carefully hidden, always leaves its mark. By the time I reached the 7th stage of my exploration, I had begun to sense that the Redmond estate was not merely a house, but an active participant in its own story. The walls themselves seemed to retain memory, whispering echoes of conversations, arguments, and sobs that had long faded from the ears of the living. Every hallway, every doorway, every room was imbued with the residue of past inhabitants, as though the very foundation of the house had absorbed their emotions, their secrets, their fears, and their betrayals. It was a place where history did not merely rest. It breathed, lingered, and sometimes intruded upon the present. The first indication came in the west wing, a part of the house that had remained locked for decades. The air was colder here, sharper, and the floorboards creaked underfoot with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. As I stepped inside, I noticed marks on the walls, faint scratches that formed patterns, symbols, and in some places illegible words. At first I thought it was the result of age or careless construction, but as I moved through the space, the scratches began to form narratives, a chronology of emotional turmoil etched into the very surface. Arguments over inheritances, whispers of forbidden love, and cryptic warnings appeared to replay themselves in endless loops, the house silently insisting that nothing ever truly faded. I paused in front of one particular wall, where the etchings were denser, almost overwhelming. The room was small, with a single window that let in the pale glow of the moon, casting long distorted shadows across the floor. The markings spoke of a child, lost to neglect, and the parents' quiet complicity in a series of misfortunes. The anguish embedded in the carvings was so palpable that I felt a wave of nausea and vertigo, as though the house itself was projecting the weight of this tragedy directly into my mind. I realized then that these walls were more than memory. They were guardians of the Redmond family's unspoken guilt, ensuring that no act, no matter how secret, would ever vanish entirely. Venturing further, I discovered a series of small rooms, each connected by narrow passages hidden behind paneling. In one, the ceiling was low, the air stifling, and the walls lined with hundreds of letters that had never been sent. They were from members of the family to one another, containing confessions, accusations, and desperate pleas. Many of these notes recounted injustices and betrayals that had gone unpunished, each letter layering upon the last to form a dense tapestry of familial dysfunction. It was overwhelming to read them, and yet impossible to stop. The house had stored not only physical artifacts but emotional imprints, creating a comprehensive record that transcended mere documentation. The next room I entered was perhaps the most unsettling. It was a study, yet completely devoid of furniture. Instead, the walls were entirely covered in ink, the handwriting of multiple generations interwoven like vines. The words recounted the family's darkest ambitions, manipulations, greed, and the calculated silences that allowed one member to rise at the expense of another. What struck me most was the consistency across generations. Though separated by decades, the patterns of behavior were nearly identical. It was as if the house had been training the family in secrecy, teaching them through silent observation, and reinforcing a cycle of control, fear, and shame. In this wing, I also discovered a small, nearly imperceptible doorway that led to a spiral staircase descending beneath the house. The steps were worn from centuries of use, and the walls hummed with the residue of countless whispered conversation. As I reached the bottom, I found a cavernous room, the floor littered with discarded items, old dolls, tattered clothes, broken toys and personal effects, each one a fragment of a life lived under the oppressive shadow of the estate. Among them were journals, meticulously detailing the intentions, mistakes and failures of each family member. The writings revealed the extent to which the Redmonds had been ensnared in a web of their own creation, each generation both victim and perpetrator, each action feeding the ongoing legacy of fear. The walls here were unlike any I had previously encountered. Etched deeply into the stone were symbols and phrases in languages both ancient and arcane, a visual record of rituals performed to bind, protect, or perhaps curse certain members of the family. It was clear that these symbols were more than decoration. They were intended as a lasting imprint, a spiritual anchor, that connected the house's history to its inhabitants in ways that defied conventional understanding. The cumulative weight of these etchings, combined with the physical presence of the artifacts and journals, created an atmosphere thick with tension, as though the estate itself was assessing my intrusion, testing my resolve. Among the scattered belongings, I uncovered items that revealed a terrifying intersection of control and manipulation. Small, coded letters detailed schemes for altering perceptions, influencing decisions, and even orchestrating accidents. There were records of medicine hidden in food, subtle intimidation through inherited wealth, and psychological manipulations that had ruined lives over decades. The house, through its walls and the objects within, was a silent witness, and sometimes accomplice to these acts, preserving them for the next generation, or the next curious observer, ensuring that the patterns of darkness persisted. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a diary belonging to the youngest child of the most recent generation. Though brief, the entries were chilling in their clarity, depicting a life lived in constant fear, observing the unspoken rules that governed the family. The child's words revealed an acute awareness of the estate's influence, recognizing the power of hidden spaces, whispered threats, and the unyielding pressure of legacy. The diary ended abruptly, the final pages smeared and torn, suggesting a confrontation or perhaps a final act of defiance. I could not determine if the child had escaped the house's influence or had succumbed to it entirely, but the presence of this record confirmed that the estate's shadow extended relentlessly, shaping perceptions and behaviors even in the youngest members. As I ascended from the spiral staircase and returned to the upper floors, the house seemed quieter, yet more expectant. The walls, it appeared, were never truly silent. They had witnessed generations, absorbed their emotions, and recorded their deeds in ways that could never be erased. To leave without acknowledging their presence would be to disrespect the intricate, terrifying network of memories that constituted the Redmond Estate. And so, as I moved back into the familiar main hall, I carried with me the weight of everything I had witnessed, acutely aware that the whispers of the walls would follow me, lingering in the mind long after I had departed. By the 8th stage of my exploration, I had begun to understand that the Redmond Estate thrived on concealment. Each floor, each corridor, and every creaking stairway seemed designed not only to house the family, but to hide them, to shield their darkest actions from the world, and to store the memories of those who had suffered under their legacy. The estate had become a living archive, a labyrinth where reality intertwined with deception, and where every hidden corner promised revelation, danger, or both. It was in the East Wing, long rumored to have been unused since the late 19th century, that I first discovered what could only be described as a network of hidden chambers. These rooms were not visible in any architectural blueprint I had studied, nor were they accessible through obvious doorways. Instead, they were cleverly concealed behind panels, under false floors, and behind heavy bookshelves. Each chamber seemed purpose-built to contain the secrets the family could not afford to be known, their very existence a testament to the Redmonds' obsession with control and preservation.
The first chamber I entered was small and windowless, the air heavy with the scent of aged paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. Inside, I found hundreds of journals, meticulously organized in chronological order. Each diary belonged to a member of the family, spanning multiple generations, and each was filled with meticulous records of daily routines, interpersonal conflicts, and clandestine observations of others. The precision with which these notes were kept suggested a morbid dedication to documentation, an almost ritualistic obsession with capturing every detail, no matter how trivial or incriminating. As I turned the pages, I realized the extent to which the family had manipulated reality, not merely for outsiders, but for themselves. The journals revealed schemes to discredit rivals, subtle threats to coerce obedience, and elaborate ruses to hide evidence of wrongdoing. There were accounts of secret meetings, letters never sent, and alliances forged in darkness, all designed to maintain an unbroken chain of power. Each generation had inherited not only the house, but a psychological framework, a set of unspoken rules for dominance and secrecy, passed down as faithfully as any family heirloom. The second chamber I found was even more disturbing. It contained items of extreme personal significance: broken toys, fragments of jewelry, letters, and photographs defaced with red ink. These objects were not merely possessions, they were instruments in the silent enforcement of the family's cruel traditions. The defacement, often by prior family members themselves, indicated rituals of shame and penance, a form of psychological conditioning that ensured compliance and obedience. To see the evidence of these acts laid out with such cold precision was both unsettling and heartbreaking. Further exploration revealed a chamber dedicated entirely to correspondences with outsiders, friends, business associates, and distant relatives. What struck me was the duality of these communications. Each letter projected civility, cooperation, or affection, while simultaneously embedding subtle threats or manipulations. The family had perfected the art of outward appearance, ensuring that to anyone beyond the estate, they seemed ordinary, even charming. Yet behind the closed doors, these same individuals orchestrated a network of coercion and secrecy, guaranteeing that any potential threat was neutralized long before it could manifest. One particularly chilling discovery was a set of letters written during periods of financial crisis. They revealed the family's willingness to exploit tragedy for personal gain, to manipulate legal systems, and to turn allies into enemies without hesitation. Each plan was executed with meticulous care, and the chambers themselves served as both record and instrument, ensuring that no one could ever claim ignorance. It became clear that the Redmonds had transformed secrecy into an art form, a weapon as formidable as any tangible inheritance. The chambers were not all about written records. Some contained physical modifications to the house itself, hidden compartments in walls, secret tunnels leading to courtyards, and concealed panels that allowed for observation of unsuspecting visitors. These architectural choices revealed a preoccupation not only with hiding information but with controlling perception, creating a reality in which the family could act with impunity. Even the smallest detail, a misplaced painting, a slightly uneven floorboard, served as both a barrier and a signal, guiding only those who understood the estate's cryptic language. It was in the final chamber of this hidden network that I discovered the most personal and haunting evidence of the family's legacy. Here were records of births, deaths, and marriages, meticulously noted and annotated with observations of character, temperament, and perceived weaknesses. It was as though the Redmonds had been creating an elaborate profile of each descendant, predicting how each would act, fail, or succeed, and preparing contingencies accordingly. Even the youngest children were scrutinized with the same intensity, their behaviors recorded as part of an ongoing experiment that stretched over decades. The psychological weight of these discoveries was immense. The estate had not merely preserved objects or documents, it had captured the essence of the family's intentions, ambitions, and sins. The chambers themselves seemed alive, their very walls resonating with the decisions made within them, the plans hatched, and the deceptions executed. It became clear that the Redmond Estate was not simply a passive witness to history. It was an active participant, shaping the lives of those who dwelled within it, influencing their choices, and in subtle ways, ensuring the continuity of its dark tradition. Emerging from the hidden chambers, I felt a mixture of awe and dread. The knowledge contained within those secret rooms was staggering, yet the very act of uncovering it brought a heavy burden. The estate demanded careful observation and cautious interpretation, for any misstep could misrepresent the truth or expose the investigator to its lingering influence. I realized that my exploration had only just begun, that the Redmond's legacy was far from fully understood, and that the hidden chambers were merely one facet of an elaborate, multi-layered puzzle that spanned generations. The Redmond Estate, I came to understand, was a master of concealment and revelation alike. Its hidden chambers offered glimpses into the private horrors, ambitions and manipulations of a family bound by blood and secrecy. To leave without acknowledging these truths would be to ignore the profound depth of the estate's influence. And so as I returned to the more familiar parts of the house, I carried with me a growing awareness that each hidden space, each secret chamber and each concealed document was part of a continuum, an unbroken chain of human behavior that refused to remain hidden forever. By the time I reached the 9th part of my investigation into the Redmond Estate, it had become clear that the house was more than just a collection of walls and hallways. It was a stage for generations of ritualized behavior, secrecy, and psychological dominance. Each discovery had added layers of complexity to the family's story, and yet what remained was even darker, more intimate, and far more disturbing than anything I had encountered before. The chamber's hidden passages and journals were only the beginning. The real essence of the Redmond legacy lay in their rituals, those patterns of behavior and hidden ceremonies that shaped the very fabric of their existence. Through scattered testimonies and fragile records, I began to piece together the nature of these rituals. They were not simply religious or ceremonial in the conventional sense. Rather, they were acts of power, control, and manipulation, meticulously performed to instill obedience and perpetuate the family's influence. Each ritual reinforced hierarchy within the family, strengthened secrecy, and maintained the delicate balance of fear and loyalty that the Redmonds relied upon. Even the youngest children were subjected to practices that conditioned their minds and hearts, creating a culture in which deviation from the norm was unthinkable. One particularly chilling account described a tradition known as the Night of the Legend. On this night, the family gathered in a hidden chamber, each member bringing a personal account of perceived betrayals, failures, or acts of disobedience. These accounts, meticulously written, were read aloud under dim candlelight, with the family collectively deciding which grievances warranted punishment and which would be noted for future scrutiny. What struck me was the procedural precision. No emotion was allowed to interfere with judgment, and even minor infractions were recorded with exacting care. Over time, this ritual created an environment where every action, every word, and every glance was under constant evaluation, leaving the participants in a state of perpetual vigilance. Other rituals revolved around the manipulation of visitors and outside guests were often subjected to subtle psychological tests, designed to reveal weaknesses, provoke confessions, or create dependency on the family. At first glance, these interactions seemed benign: polite dinners, elaborate tours of the estate, or casual conversation. But the Redmonds had mastered the art of influence, ensuring that each encounter reinforced their dominance and subtly shaped perceptions of the family. These rituals were a testament to their understanding of human behavior, blending observation, subtle coercion, and calculated intimidation into a framework that was nearly impossible to resist. A particularly harrowing ritual involved the marking of family milestones with symbols and objects that carried hidden meanings. Births, marriages, and deaths were commemorated not only with conventional celebrations, but also with secret symbols placed throughout the estate. These symbols were carefully designed to communicate messages to those who knew their significance, a silent language of power and control. To the uninitiated, they were merely decorative. To the family, they reinforced hierarchy, obedience, and the ever-present legacy of the Redmond lineage. As I delved deeper, I realized that the rituals were intertwined with the estate itself. The architecture, the arrangement of furniture, and the placement of art and mirrors were all part of an elaborate system designed to facilitate observation,
enforce rules, and manipulate perception. Mirrors, for instance, were strategically positioned to allow family members to watch one another without detection, creating a constant atmosphere of surveillance. Stairways were built with subtle inclines and squeaks to indicate movement, and the placement of doors and windows was such that privacy was an illusion rather than a reality. Every design choice was deliberate, reinforcing the psychological frameworks established by the rituals themselves. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these practices was their longevity. Generations had perpetuated the same rituals, modifying them only slightly to accommodate changing circumstances, but never abandoning them. Children born into the family were indoctrinated almost from birth, taught to participate in and respect these customs as an unquestionable aspect of their heritage. The psychological impact was profound. Each new generation internalized the rituals, embedding fear, obedience, and secrecy into their very identities. It was a cycle that seemed unbreakable, a haunting demonstration of how deeply cultural and familial expectations could shape human behavior. I also discovered that the Redmonds' rituals had a broader social reach. They extended beyond the family to include servants, neighbors, and even local authorities who, knowingly or unknowingly, became part of the performance. Letters and instructions revealed that outsiders were sometimes subtly coerced or manipulated into maintaining secrecy, ensuring that the family's influence radiated far beyond the walls of the estate. The house itself acted as both a shield and a stage, allowing the family to project normalcy to the outside world while conducting their dark practices in private. The culmination of my research into these rituals was a profound understanding of how fear and secrecy had been cultivated as instruments of control. The Redmonds were masters not only of concealment but of psychological manipulation, embedding an intricate network of influence into the very fabric of the estate and the minds of its inhabitants. The rituals were not random acts. They were deliberate, calculated strategies designed to maintain power, enforce loyalty, and ensure that the family's legacy endured at all costs. By the end of this phase, it became evident that the house, the chambers, the hidden symbols, and the meticulously recorded journals were all components of a vast system designed to perpetuate influence and conceal truth. The family's rituals were the living pulse of the estate, a force that shaped behavior, dictated norms, and cast long shadows over every aspect of life within those walls. To leave without understanding them would be to overlook the essence of the Redmond legacy, for it was in these practices, repeated with precision over generations, that the true nature of their power and secrecy resided. The weight of these discoveries was almost unbearable. To see how meticulously the family had orchestrated control, how deeply the rituals penetrated the lives of every member, and how subtly outsiders were ensnared, was to witness the dark genius of human behavior at its most calculated. It was a reminder that history is not always written in books or recorded in grand events. Sometimes it is etched quietly into walls, whispered through hidden corridors, and performed in rituals that demand attention, respect, and if necessary, fear. As I reached the 10th and final chapter of my investigation into the Redmond Estate, a profound sense of inevitability settled over me. Years of research, countless hours spent poring over faded journals, interviewing reluctant witnesses, and exploring hidden chambers had led to this moment. I knew that even after uncovering the family's rituals, the hidden vaults, the cryptic symbols, and the meticulously recorded transgressions, there was still more waiting, secrets so tightly woven into the estate's very walls that they seemed almost alive, resisting exposure. The final discoveries would not only complete the picture of the Redmond legacy, but also reveal why the estate had claimed its victims for generations, leaving a haunting imprint that could never be fully erased. The most immediate revelation came from the attic, a space I had visited many times before but never fully explored. Beneath loose floorboards and behind stacks of old furniture, I found a collection of ledgers, letters, and personal diaries spanning 3 centuries. Each document offered a unique perspective on the family's inner workings, accounts of births, deaths, forbidden relationships, and most disturbing of all, the precise documentation of the family's manipulation. These records were not casual notes. They were legalistic in their precision, chronicling every transgression, every betrayal, every instance where fear or control had been exercised. What struck me most was the consistency. Across centuries, the Redmonds had maintained a single philosophy: secrecy above all else. Everything from minor disputes to major tragedies was carefully recorded, categorized, and hidden. The ledgers read like a meticulous ledger of human experience, each entry carefully considered and precisely worded. There was no room for error, no allowance for human emotion to interfere. This relentless obsession with control was both fascinating and horrifying, a window into a mindset that valued power over empathy, order over love, and secrecy over truth. Among the diaries, I discovered first-hand accounts of individuals who had attempted to defy the family's rules or escape the estate's grip. These narratives painted a picture of a world where hope was fleeting, and the consequences of defiance were immediate and devastating. Children who had attempted to speak out were shamed, ostracized, or psychologically manipulated into compliance. Spouses who questioned the family's authority were isolated and monitored. Even servants and neighbors, seemingly minor players, were subtly coerced into silence. The estate's influence extended far beyond its physical walls, creating a network of fear and complicity that reinforced the family's dominance. The final secret, however, was the most personal and haunted, and in the deepest vault of the estate was a collection of photographs, each one capturing moments that the family had intended to keep secret forever. Weddings, births, funerals, and clandestine gatherings were all immortalized, but the images were eerie, almost staged, and charged with a sense of inevitability. The subjects often appeared uncomfortable, eyes averted, hands clenched, expressions tense. It was clear that the Redmonds had not merely documented life, they had orchestrated. Every moment had been observed, every smile calculated, every gesture scrutinized. The photographs were proof of a life lived under constant surveillance, a chilling testament to the pervasive control the family exercised over its members. As I examined these final artifacts, a pattern became undeniable. The estate itself was a character in the story, an active participant in shaping behavior, enforcing rules, and perpetuating fear. The architecture, the secret passages, the hidden rooms, and the strategically placed mirrors were all components of a system designed to monitor, manipulate, and control. The house was not just a backdrop, it was a tool, a repository of influence, and a silent witness to the family's darkest impulses. Its walls absorbed secrets, its floors echoed with whispers, and its corners held the weight of generations of human behavior. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the realization that the Redmond legacy had consequences far beyond what could be seen or documented. Psychological scars, broken relationships, and a culture of fear had been passed down, generation to generation. Even those who escaped the estate's physical confines carried its influence in subtle ways: hesitation, self-doubt, and a deep-seated wariness of trust. The family's reach extended across time, shaping not only the lives of those who lived under its roof, but also the lives of descendants and associates who had never set foot inside. In the final analysis, the Redmond Estate was a microcosm of human desire for control, a study in how power, secrecy, and ritual can intertwine to shape behavior and perpetuate influence. It was a stark reminder of the potential darkness within familial bonds, the way loyalty can be exploited, and the cost of unchecked authority. The estate's secrets were many, but their overarching message was clear: power comes at a price, and those who seek to preserve it will go to unimaginable lengths to protect it. As I closed the last journal, left the final room, and stepped out into the cold night, I felt a profound mixture of relief, awe, and unease. The Redmonds had left behind a legacy that was both fascinating and horrifying, a labyrinth of secrets that would continue to haunt anyone who dared to uncover them. The house remained, silent and imposing, a monument to the family's unyielding control, its shadows stretching across the land, waiting for the next curious soul. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.